Thank you very much for the kind invitation, and it's always a little bit strange that you are meeting, with Pakistanis discussing Pakistan as a foreigner, especially if you have a panel which is so, competent and so well known. And this, as an excuse, I can just bring forward that I have not just arrived last year in Pakistan, but I have been here maybe 30 or 40 times before coming to Pakistan since 1988 and studying it, published a book on it in German, so I kind of feel at home in your country as well. But still it's a little bit unusual to moderate a session for such an eminent panel as a foreigner. Let me just make a few remarks to give a framework for our discussion before we go to the panelists. There are just 3 points that I would briefly like to raise. The first, obviously, and that is the reason I assume that the title that we have we won the war against terrorism, has been chosen, is that the number of violent deaths in Pakistan has been declining sharply in the last 8 years. From maybe a little bit less than 12,000 per year to what we assume maybe 400 last year. 400 people killed because of political violence still is pretty bad in many countries. In Germany it would be a shocking figure. But in Pakistan, when you come from 12,000, it is a dramatic improvement, and maybe it is something which will continue in the future. The question, though, here is whether this success or this reducing number of violent deaths in the country has been brought about by smart policies, by a very good implementation of policies, or whether it's just a wave which goes up and down. If you have a kind of flood in the country, the flood will recede anyway, whether we do something or not. We can reduce the level of suffering, but the flood, or if I have an illness, it may go away even without going to a doctor. That is something I would like to ask our esteemed panelists, whether they think that this reduction of numbers in violent death is actually an achievement of political success, or is it just happening because bad things end sometimes? The second point I want to raise is that the term that we have here, war against terrorism, as we probably are aware, is a very strange term which has been imported from the United States of America. And I guess that we are probably more or less agreeing that it's a very, inappropriate term. You are not having a war against terrorism. You're having a war against foreign armies. You have a war against people who are armed. Terrorism is a concept, and it's not something that you can kill. It is something conceptually. So maybe the panelists can try to illuminate who exactly the target it is. Like you cannot have a war against drugs, because drugs are not people. You cannot by itself have a war against terrorism as a category. But still, war was going on, people got killed, operations were going on, maybe you can illuminate. And the final point that I want to raise also is that we probably have to, a little bit in our discussion, in our dialogue here, think about what security means in countries and societies. Does it mean stopping of killing? When I have been teaching in Germany to my students, I basically ask them, in our seminar room or in our room today, we feel secure. Because nobody has the intention to hurt or kill the other one. I will not kill a panelist, I promise, and the audience looks quite peaceful. If we would bring in 20 heavily armed people with Kalashnikov, would security increase or would it decrease? The point being that security to some degree has to do with avoiding conditions which leads to violence, besides sometimes catching or bringing to court the bad guys who are violent. So it has a coercive side and it has a political side about creating a functioning society where there is no need for using violence. And again, this is one of the points I would be very delighted if our panelists could actually give us some insight in. So maybe we just start in the same order that the panelists were introduced. So we would start with Mr. Tariq Elbaz, if you don't mind. Please.
Thank you very much. It's certainly a pleasure to be here today and share our views on this very important topic. And a very interesting question. Would you like to introduce her?
Well,
although
I think
she's
we
very well
introduced
known.
Karen.
she was
Just carry
introduced
on.
already, and we can get back to her when she said that. I don't want to interrupt you now.
Carry on.
Please. A very interesting question. Have we won the war against terrorism? I think the consensus would be not yet. We have still a long way to go. And the three important questions raised by the host, Dr. Jochen, are very important questions, and I will try to address these during the course of my discussion here. Because the points I had in mind were in a bit different sequence. And I would start with this thing that has already been pointed out, that there has been a significant reduction in the number of terrorist attacks in Pakistan. I would say that it was a sea change. If you go back to 2009, imagine that the number of attacks were more than 2,000 and the number of people killed were more than 3,000 and thousands of more people who were injured or maimed, and we come to 2018 and there is 90% reduction in the number of attacks, 90% reduction in the number of attacks as well as the number of people killed. But to me the most important thing is that in 2009, I remember very vividly that when the PTP took over Swat, and people were saying that Islamabad is only 100 kilometers away. There was a wedding sense of helplessness in the society that we cannot do anything. I mean, they're just coming and we are watching it. That sense of helplessness was broken. The momentum of the terrorists was broken in 2009 and 2010, and that is why we are here today, relaxing in a very different environment. So, while I say that yes, there has been a lot of reduction, considerable reduction, and then consistent reduction. I mean, as the doctor said, that is it just a graph or what is it? I would say that it is pretty sustainable. And the evidence for that is that every year there has been a consistent reduction in the number of attacks as well as in the number of casualties, indicating that we were on the right track. But, and this is a but with a very big B, as pointed out by Doctor, that last year we had 229 terrorist attacks, which means 4 terrorist attacks a week. Last year we had 350 people killed, which means almost one casualty per day. Yes, it's much better than 2009, but we've still a long way to go. The terrorists made it very clear that they can attack with the considerable impunity. In Balochistan, terrorist attacks were carried out in 20 districts, fairly widespread. Similarly, most of the attacks last year were in North Waziristan, their previous stronghold. So the point I want to make here is that the terrorists are down, certainly, but not out. And there is still a long way to go. Complacence can be very damaging. If we become complacent and we think that we won the war, I think that is the first step towards encouraging the terrorists to reinvigorate, to revive themselves. And I say this on the basis of what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq. In Afghanistan, if you go back to 2001, November, or even 2002, the Afghan Taliban were nowhere to be seen. We thought they were gone for good. The Taliban leaders, they shaved off their beards, and they were just afraid of being seen in the public. And all of us, the United States particularly, and well, let us be honest, we also felt that, well, probably this is the end of the Taliban. But then what happened? That in 2004, 2003, the US took the eyes off the ball and shifted its attention to Iran. And as a result of that, this was the major factor. There were other factors also, for example, indiscriminate violence used by the law enforcement agencies as well as the military in Afghanistan. But the basic reason was that they thought that they had won the war and they could afford another war. They shifted the resources, they shifted the attention naturally. When you have another war, your attention is shifted, your resources are shifted. And the result, well, we saw Taliban came back with a bang, though a bit gradually, and now we see the United States carrying out negotiations with it. Iraq. After the death of Zarqawi in 2006, the United States was very happy. We, all of us, were very happy that a big terrorist has been killed. Islamic State in Iraq is now probably down, and their new leader, Mullah Umar Baghdadi, was not in a position to take over the role. And from 2006 to 2010, there was a consistent decline in the activities of the Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or you can call it Islamic State in Iraq. 2010, Umar Baghdadi is killed and Abu Bakr Baghdadi takes over. Still, we are very confident and optimistic that, well, they are gone for good. And the Sunnis are up in arms against Al-Qaeda and they can't be revived. 2014, bang, Islamic State captures territory. So what happened? What went wrong? I think what went wrong was that the world or the United States proclaimed victory a bit too early. And as very rightly pointed out, it would be very interesting to find out what does victory look like when you're fighting war against the terrorists. It's not a question of territory, it's much more than that. So, the point I want to make here is that we would like to believe that we won the war, but a premature declaration of victory can be very, very risky for us.
Thank you very much for your insights. Or you have some other points? Okay.
I'm just let me finish, please. And a very interesting comment was made by a very respected analyst on security, that the major reason for the re-emergence of Al-Qaeda or ISI, by ISI I mean Islamic State in Iraq, not to be confused with our ISI, or let us call it ISIS, whatever its name is now. The major reason for the revival of ISIS was less the strength of ISIS itself, but the mistakes or mishandling by the Iraqi government. And they thought that now they could take them easy, and they started resorting to normal tactics. What were those tactics? The major partners against ISIS were the Sunni tribes. And when they thought that ISIS has been defeated, they stopped supporting the Sunni tribes, the awakening councils. They dealt with political dissidents within the Sunni, and I am making a deliberate point here. They dealt with the political dissidents within the Sunni tribes by oppressing them. In the election of 2008, 550 dissidents, political dissidents within the Sunni tribes who were supporters of Iraqi government, the Maliki government, they were banned from participating in the election. The point I want to make here is that political dissidents, we have to distinguish between political dissidents and militancy. A person can be a political dissident, but it doesn't have to be a militant. I'm indirectly referring to just a question for the audience. Are we making the same mistake in the case of PTM?
Yes.
Who knows? Another area which led to the emergence of ISIS was corruption and mishandling of the post-conflict reconstruction in Iraq. I mean, once ISIS was defeated, the Sunni tribes were on your side. Now the reconstruction begins. And in this reconstruction, what happens? The corrupt people came over to take away the funds. And what happened because of that? People were not given any relief, and they started going back to ISIS. We are carrying out a reconstruction on a large scale in Fatah after a very, very critical victory there. We just need to learn that this reconstruction, if not handled properly, can become the cause of the resurgence of militancy. That's the point I want to make. What is the time limit, by the way? It's still some time.
Well, we would like later to invite the audience, so if we all could be a little bit brief, it would be wonderful.
Yeah, I'll be very quick.
But I don't want to have a strict time limit.
Yeah,
But still, let's try to.
Coming to the conclusions. 2 or 3 quick conclusions. Well, we're very clear it's not victory yet. So what do we do to carry out this campaign to the logical conclusion? Point number 1, we need to carry out a paradigm shift in our approach to dealing with counter-terrorism. We have to move from the military, from the lead role of the military to the lead role of the civilian institutions. Because the counter-terrorism is the responsibility of the civilian institutions. And we have to work within the framework of rule of law. The lead role of the militancy, of the military earlier was the need of the hour. There was insurgency going on in Fatah, and we had to get back the territory. We had to take over data networks. Similarly in Sawat, that was the need. But the military fulfilled its need. It did an excellent job. But now the next phase requires that we move on to the supremacy, to the lead role of civilian institutions, capacity building of the civilian institutions, the police, the prosecution, the courts, and above all, the other stakeholders. That's point number 1. And point number 2 is that we have to carry out another paradigm shift in our approach. We have to shift our emphasis from kinetic to non-kinetic measures. While, as I've said earlier, the challenge of military networks continues, which needs to be addressed by the kinetic measures. What is more important now is the non-kinetic aspect. Now, what do I mean by the non-kinetic aspect? Number one, countering their ideology. Number two, targeting their sources of funding. Number three, being sensitive to the requirements of the area for the post-conflict reconstruction, so that the post-conflict reconstruction becomes a source of normalization of the lives of the people living there, not a source of grievance which drives them into the arms of the militants. I think that's probably all. These are the basic points which I wanted to make, and thank you very much.
So, thank you for your insights, which I found very illuminating. When I just summarize it very briefly, I think your point is the violence in Iraq and also in parts of Pakistan has been triggered by a political vacuum which people could fill, and that to fight it, it would not just kinetic means, but also political, psychological, and other means to be successful. Yeah. Thank you very much. Now, I think we just move on to Mr. Tariq Hussain.
Thank you. At the outset, let me thank and congratulate Pak Institute of Peace Studies for holding this important national dialogue. Because unless you admit your mistakes, unless you speak the truth, I think you can't go further. So therefore, in a national dialogue, there is an important factor is that while placing the facts before each one of us, we must also identify where we have gone wrong. And that's, I think, the purpose of this, and what's the way forward. The three questions posed by the moderator, I think, are very pertinent. Let me start by saying that war against terror is an ill-conceived term which from the outset, shifted the whole balance in favor of militarization of internal security strategies. As Mr. Tariq Parvez has just pointed out, I think you have to have a different approach where the balance of kinetic and non-kinetic measures are important. So therefore, it's a battle of hearts and minds. It's an ideology issue. It's an issue where you have to engage with your citizens who are disillusioned, who have many grievances against the state. It's the state policies which have faltered, and that's why the result is this terrorism or violence, not only against the state, but amongst various segments of the state. So war against terror, the very terminology, ill-conceived, ill-defined, ill-pursued. I think it has been a folly. Secondly, security framework or national security. Now Pakistan has become a national security state, caught between two visions, of one 1973 by Z.A. Bhutto and the other, the 80s, General Zia's injection of fundamentalist water in the corporate blood of the military. So jihad as an industry was promoted by the state. State promoted and created non-state actors. You created militant organizations to pursue your agendas, whether they were regional, whether they were global or national. So therefore, I hold the state fully responsible for where we are today and what the kind of dialogue which we are having is because of the faulty national security framework. Pakistan to date does not have a national security policy. Our national security policy has to be, we have to humanize the state. We have to strike a balance between security and justice. Unless you do that, you're going to go nowhere. Kinetic approach, 30% reduction in terror incidents and others. I think, yes, moving forward, military means, short term, but long term, what is the approach that we are taking from a law enforcement perspective or from a humanizing the society, engaging with the society. I think that has been a lacking factor where, which is a big flaw. Coming to your major issue which you raised, is this a result of good policies or violence which has gone down a bit this year? Well, let me say that Pakistan showed some, and the citizens and society showed some national resolve after the tragedy of the 16th December 2014. And that is where the operations had been started, where our military doctrine basically changed, and that resulted. What were the factors? Because there are three big factors in Pakistani fabric of what we are talking about today. There are three M's. First M is mullah, or the mindset, or extremism, religious extremism. The second is militants, non-state actors. And who creates those non-state actors? The state, by from abroad or from within. And third is M is military. Military is part of the problem, but a bigger part of the solution. So what happened on the 16th of December was because military doctrine changed when General Kiani took over. And that is an address in Kabul where he said that mortal threat to Pakistani state is posed by these terrorists and non-state actors. India does not pose a mortal threat to Pakistan. What is internal fault line that we need to address. So the military doctrine changed. And that is where we saw Swat and South Waziristan operations undertaken. Followed by that, General Rahil Sharif, he hit at the very epicenter of terrorism. That is, in June 2014, he went into North Waziristan. And that is an action where he was, going after the Taliban, whether across the border or here, internally. Because Taliban had attacked GHQ. That changed the whole military mindset. That GHQ in 2009 can be attacked by the militants. So, military felt the threat, and that is why the response is. So General Rahil Sharif and this North Waziristan operation, where it is Taliban focused. And we see the National Action Plan, where the focus was on counter-terrorism measures, on kinetic measures. The military courts came in. For 4 years, the military courts were there. 300 people were given death sentences. 60 have been executed so far. And similarly, Karachi operation, lots of success met in the context of kinetic measures, where you, from 163 incidents in a year in 2013 to 4 incidents in 2019. And similarly, the casualties also dropping. So that point of view, Karachi operation, where the state showed its resolve and you went in and sorted out the problem, yes. Another important aspect of National Action Plan was FATA, the mainstreaming of FATA. And so through a constitutional amendment, you have now merged FATA in KP, which is a good measure. But in the context of collateral damage that you've caused in operations, in the context of disillusionment which has been inculcated in that, so you have to address that. That the PTM and Pashtun and others are grassroots movement. You have to recognize those aspects. And above all was the issue of reconciliation with the people who are angry in Balochistan. It is the Baloch youth, and so therefore it was an important component of National Action Plan that we will talk. Reconciliation will be the way forward in Balochistan. And General Janjua has been commanding in Balochistan, where the previous policy of dumping and killing and dumping the people was abandoned while he was there, and a stick and carrot approach was adopted. And so slowly and steadily, militant or some missing persons started coming back. But that doesn't mean that we have succeeded. That is still, I think, a festering wound that must be addressed in the context of our dialogue today, in the context of Balochistan, where your future, where your economic prosperity, where engagement and empowering the local people is so vital. So our policies, I think, when you show a national resolve, a counter-terrorism action plan, the focus was on CT and not on countering violent extremism or that mindset. So my view is, yes, you have made a difference through military means, but that will only be sustained if you address that mindset of religious extremism, the countering of violent extremism strategy, which needs to be pursued, which was prepared. So that is where the entire aspects of the state need to be on the same page. I would also like to point out in the context of non-state actors that the policy that Rahil Sharif went into North Waziristan later, now they generally called Bajwa doctrine, it is military doctrine. The military doctrine, Radd al-Fasad, is basically the whole of nation and where the intelligence-based operations are being carried out, and the way the civilian and military and other agencies are pursuing these objectives is because there are no more military courts. You have to strengthen the regular criminal justice system. You have to strengthen the anti-terrorism courts and that aspect. So therefore, this is an approach where, let me share that in March 2019, when I asked the Army Chief that, what are you going to do about these strategic assets? Because real fight of militancy is going to be in the mainland of Punjab. And that is where your strategic assets are. So what are you going to do about them? And he was very clear. He said in January 2019, the State National Security Committee, the political and the military leadership took a conscious decision that time for proxies is over. Now this is the military chief telling and he said this is not post-Pulwama. This is not something that that was an external thrust, but we realized that there is now no more scope for non-state actors. So therefore, Pakistani state wants to pursue a policy that non-state actors pursue their own violent agenda, and there is no scope for that, and that will be the first starting point, a recognition that we committed mistakes. We used these strategic assets for meeting our national objective. Then those follies are no more, I think, to be pursued, and that is why, hopefully, the state is changing course, and hopefully, this is we are watching with bated breath that whether the military or the state also means it truly in the context against the non-state actors. So, ladies and gentlemen, the 3 M's are important, but the mullah mindset is not being addressed fully. Unfortunately, that is where is a long-term challenge, and that is where political, social engagement, the contract between society and state will only be renewed once the state shows its seriousness towards that objective. So this is still a long drawn battle. This is going to take time. It takes generations to fight such mindsets. It's ideologies which is important. We just can't declare victory. I remember with respect to General Janjua, who's sharing the stage with us, in April 2008, he declared, of course he's a soldier, he declared victory. He said, emphatically declared that we have almost won the war against terrorism. I remember saying that, yes, as a soldier he would like to win any war, but we haven't, I think, achieved our objective fully. We have a long way to go, and that is where a due process, a criminal justice, or a rule of law approach should be followed, and a balance of kinetic and non-kinetic measures need to be taken. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your outspoken and illuminating words. I'm tempted to ask you a question, but because in the reason of time, I will refrain from that and we move straight to Mr. Sayyid Hussain.
Thank you so much. Quite a lot has been said. Well, actually, starting from the very term war on terrorism. In fact, actually, this very term has caused more problem to the world. And one can ask this question, whether the world is more safe now than it was. What we have seen actually, it all happened after, we all know about now, after 9/11, it changed the world. And President Bush at that point of time declared a war on terror without thinking actually what does it really mean. Yes, actually the terrorist attack in New York and Washington has a huge caused huge casualties, and one can understand the psyche of the American nation at that point of time. But basically, when we are talking about going to Afghanistan, it was a war without thinking. It was war of revenge. I would say that. Yes, actually, the people who were responsible for 9/11 attacks may have been living in Afghanistan, but basically going into Afghanistan, then actually this war has continued for 18 years. So when we're talking about winning a war on terror, it's completely misnomer, because at this point of time, I think world is less secure, less safer than it was after 9/11. More people have been killed after 9/11. More people are being killed even now when the Americans are basically supposed to have declared victory in Iraq. War is still continuing in Afghanistan. Now let me come back to Pakistan. When we're talking about militancy in Pakistan, we can see that external factors and internal factors. They're both actually Pakistan. The rise of militancy in Pakistan has been caused by internal factors as well as external factors. External factor, yes, actually whatever happened in Afghanistan over the last 4 decades has directly affected Pakistan's policy. 1980s was the turning point, and where we saw that that jihad and militancy had become a state policy, and not only state policy, also was, I think probably it was international policy. United States was here. Pakistan, United States, and other countries fought this war against Soviet forces in Afghanistan in the name of jihad. And that was the period when we saw the rise of Islamic militant group. And it was justified. It was hailed, it was praised at that point, because it was fighting somebody else's war. And so what was witnessed in 1990s, Pakistan became the hub of those militant organizations. Not only Pakistani militant groups emerged, but also the volunteers or the fighters from across the Middle East came to Pakistan. And what we witnessed actually after that, not only Pakistan had been affected by this, but also Middle East. The entire politics of Middle East is directly linked with whatever happened in Afghanistan in 1980s. All those groups, we were supposed to be fighting their war, whether it was Egypt, Algeria, or other countries. They have their roots going back to Afghanistan's war. So that is what the context of the whole thing. Osama bin Laden, he was also a part of the Afghan Jihad. All those, actually, most of Al-Qaeda members who were Zawahiri and XYZ, they all came to Pakistan to participate in this jihad. So what we see is in 1990s, when the end of, when some Soviet forces withdrew from Afghanistan, we saw those, this culture of militant organization. And then it's also had to do with some internal factors. As I don't know, have to go into detail of that, what Jalazia did it. And in 1990s, we thought actually that because of the militant organization, the war against Soviet Union has been won. And that was basically the perception of the people at that point. I remember Hamid Gul saying that we actually were responsible for disintegration of Soviet Union. And that war, that 1990s, we saw a state patronage to those militant groups which were fighting actually our war in other, like in Kashmir or even in Afghanistan. And that is basically what we call using militancy as a tool of foreign policy. That became a kind of thing. And then 2001, the world has changed again. We became actually a partner in another war with the United States. This is what called war on terror. So we did not know what does it all mean. And the result is that US went to Afghanistan. Maybe actually Al-Qaeda was pushed into Pakistan. And the Taliban were defeated. Taliban retreated and this war has continued. Now, after 2004 and 2005, we saw the rise of militancy in tribal areas. Those were the areas where it was used as a, as a boarding point for the jihadis in Afghanistan. And one thing also very clear when we are talking about policy frame, because we cannot see the level of violence has come down, so we have won the war. But basically, what is happening in is FATA. It's also very important, because Pakistan fought this war against insurgency in that area. And this lawless area was deliberately kept as a semi-autonomous status was given to it, because we wanted to use it for other purposes. So basically, there was a deliberate ambiguity about that area. So in a way, what happened for last 1 decade, Pakistan has lost about 5,000 soldiers fighting this war in FATA. Had this war won? Well, actually, one can argue that insurgency has been contained. I would say, I use the word particularly the contained. Insurgency has been contained. Pakistan has been able to reclaim the authority of those areas, but it's still actually it's not clear from the insurgency. So the root cause of militancy is still there. And we see this sporadic attacks continuing in North Waziristan and other areas. Well, actually, Pakistan has done well by integrating those areas, but still it's a long way to go before actually the problem and of the people could be addressed. So in a way, actually, it was important that after kinetic measure, after we won actually against insurgency, to use of brute force. But now actually the time has come to actually to address those causes where the people were forced to take up arms. And I think probably Pakistan's problem is, as I said earlier, it's not just internal, it's also external. Now we have seen actually Afghanistan, some kind of negotiation, peace negotiation is going there. There may be actually some kind of agreement may also reach between Americans and Afghan Taliban. But basically it will not mean the end of war in Afghanistan. And whatever happens in Afghanistan will have a direct bearing on Pakistan once again. So in a way, actually, we have this situation will continue for us. I will just add one point. When we're talking about this terrorism, so what we have forgotten about, ideology of that, and also the sectarian terrorism in Pakistan. The level of violence may have come down, but still actually sectarian violence or terrorism, I would say, is not actually, is subsided, but it has not completely finished. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for these insights, which were a bit pessimistic, but which I think were also convincing to many people. And also thank you for paying attention when I symbolized the time. Not all people in the world would pay attention as you did. Thank you very much. Now, the fourth panelist is Nassim Shekha, who was introduced before. So I'm not doing it again, but I should tell you that we go back maybe about 30 years or so when we first met in Pakistan. So it's a big pleasure to also have you.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me to speak. I think that a lot has been said. We are short on time. I don't want to repeat too much. Just a couple of quick things. Number one, that I think that the turning point in terms of terrorism globally was 1979 onwards. So you had basically Pakistan. Why was it a turning point? You had Islamic Brotherhood, you had organizations in the Middle East, in different parts of the world, but they were all mostly limited to their own territories. In 79, when Pakistan got engaged, obviously the Soviet invention and the US response, and Pakistan basically co-authoring that response, we brought into Pakistan people with extremist mindset, people who were believers but with their extreme views, who sat on the margins of society in the Muslim countries. We brought them to Pakistan. We, supported by US dollars, brought them to Pakistan, and in Pakistan this is the first time, I think that's really a turning point, that the internationalization of resistance, militancy, which subsequently turns into terrorism, took place. And how does that happen? They're brought to Pakistan. This is where the factories, I will use a better word, but this is where the factories of creating an international outlook, you're fighting the other, you're fighting the enemy at a global level. Before this, what we saw was the Soviets doing their politics, etc. The communists in Eastern Europe, in a sense, a counter to that, framed within Islamic framework, started to take roots 79 onwards. We brought them here, we trained them here, and these people sat on the margins of society. And just let's accept that in every society throughout history there have been people with extreme views on both sides, and then you have the center, people in the center. This whole thing was turned around 79 onwards when you brought these people to Pakistan and we started to train them in terms of fighting a global battle. Let's be clear on what we did here. In 79, not only did we do it, but Johan's country did it, the whole of Europe did it, the US did it, Egypt did it, Saudi Arabia did it. So we were all on the same page. Pakistan co-authored it, US, nobody pushed us in any direction. We took autonomous decisions. Those were wrong decisions. But let's also be clear that when President Reagan died and his burial was taking place, I was in the US and I remember hearing people who were the eulogies and the praise of President Reagan. They were all saying, we went and we brought down the Soviet Empire. We were the leaders in the free world. Pakistan was left holding the blame, and all the the praise went there. But all of that is irrelevant now, because I think the whole world is now in a much less safe zone, and it's not just about one element. I think that Johan has written a lot about it. Zahid Hussain has written about it. The role of the state, how the state, the divide between state and society took place, and democratization of violence took place all over the world. So, without going into anything, completely agreeing with what Tariq Khosaza was saying, in terms of the issues that we face here. But just let me say this. That where do we stand today? Where we stand today, I think that it's not just as simple as the relationship between the state and society. The relationship between the state and society is fundamental today in terms of Pakistanis not becoming proxies for others. In the age of internet, social media, digital world, the challenges have multiplied, in a way that the state has to be wise, thinking, constantly thinking. So this notion of winning a war on terrorism is very childish. I mean, obviously we've rolled back a state that Mr. Tariq Parvez was talking about, where there was this fear that every second day there was a huge blast, etc. So alhamdulillah, that has been taken care of. But don't forget what's happening in Balochistan. In Balochistan, terrorism continues, but that is a terrorism where TTA and TTA, Tehreek-e-Taliban, Pakistan and other groups are fighting each other. And last few months, see the number of attacks that have taken place. So there's that kind of threat. So let's just look at the kind of threats that we still face, which need a kinetic and non-kinetic response, military, non-military response. So there are external factors. In terms of, let me first start with internal. Internal factors, obviously the alienation between state and its people. So PTM is a perfect example of what happened. See where this whole thing started. It starts with the death of Pishtine, whose killer has still not been apprehended, and we know where he came from and who he was, but still he hasn't been apprehended. And then those things snowball. I think the whole notion of looking at security, one in terms of kinetic, but then and of course the problems from from India. This is not fiction, this is reality. The threats from India, whether it is Mr. Dua, what's his name, the
Dual.
NSA,
Dual.
Janjwa Saab's friend,
Ajit.
Ajit Dual. I mean, I'm saying it nicely. So Ajit Dual, Janjwa Saab really turned the notion of security around. He tried his best, and he did to a great extent what Mr. Tariq Khosa Saab is, is suggesting should be done. So anyway, so Ajit Dual, was in Pakistan sitting outside Data Darbar, if you people know that, Data Darbar and Data Ganj and Gamesha, and sat there trying to subvert, sections of the Pakistani society, Kulbhushan Yadav. We do the same, by the way, we do the same there. So there's that, then there's the India's internal problem, and then there's the uprising in Kashmir getting worse and worse. So the threats from there will come. What is happening in Afghanistan, threats from there will come. The proxy war that continues and has accelerated between Iran and Saudi Arabia does have its impact on Pakistan. Hence, we have to, so there's that, and then there's the internal alienation. The two-front challenge that we face, the only response to that is really the state changing its approach. The frontal has to be political, while you have to remain very alert on the military. So I have to stop because you keep looking at me.
Thank you very much for the contribution and also for the discipline of stopping, because I was informed before we started our panel that we have to stop sharp at 12 o'clock or maybe 3 or 4 minutes later, and I don't want to be people cutting off my head for being undisciplined. So thank you. So last but not least, now I'm very curious about what General Nasir has to say, because many people on the panel have emphasized that non-kinetic and not just military approaches are important. The two of you have also mentioned that the general has been open to this approach, so I'm very curious about this presentation.
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। आप सबकी खिदमत में अस्सलाम वालेकुम। What do I say? There's so much to say because the issue is so complicated, so intricate, that the whole of the world is faced with it and is trying to find solution. The worst thing which has haunted the globe and the world and all of us so much and has made us to bleed through our nose has been the terrorism. Ever since, we all know. Everyone is finding solutions. Everyone is working hard. Because terrorism could hit at will, anywhere, at any time, to anyone. Nobody felt safe. We got barricaded, we got barbed wire, we got obstacles, we got security. We were under a great stress. And do I talk on behalf of the world? Do I talk on behalf of Pakistan? The area is so woolly, is so hazy. It is strategically hazy. There is a past, so many mistakes of past, follies of past, blunders of past, baggage of past. What do I carry from the past to explain to you? What are we doing? Are we doing it right? Should I start digging holes? Who's doing what? What should we do? What should we be doing? I think I will be scattered and I will not be able to give you a focused answer because there is so much more which links with the terrorism, which links with the extreme thought, which links with the causes, but that should take us much more time. within this hazy area, let me first talk of Pakistan. Let me talk of Pakistani people. Let me say what all we have been able to do. I remember very vividly how isolated and how vulnerable and how insecure I was on 11th November 2007 when I stood in Sawat, where I was to conduct operations against those who were asking for Sharia. Imagine what a huge, huge challenge that the Muslim armed forces are confronting an agenda where the enemy is asking for Sharia and you are into launching operations against them. Because unfortunately it had not been resolved politically. And the situation had worsened to that an extent that we were into operations. And then there was no one to meet me. There was no one to support me. There was no government machinery. And people were just slaughtered by the terrorists. The heads were shown on the jeeps. I have seen man, wolf, more worse than the wolves. इंसान को दरिंदों से बढ़ के मैंने देखा. And when in August 2013 I was in Balochistan, again I was having the same feeling. Nobody could fly the flag of Pakistan. You have to pay through your life if you do that. Nobody could sing national anthem. So having been through all these, let me just focus on the question rather than talking of all else. Let me just focus, because our nation, our people are looking forward to see an answer to this, like all other nations in the world, that have we won the war on terrorism? Let's focus on this. I have already said no head counts, no my ears, because everything is invisible. It is diluted in the air, it is diluted in the people, it is diluted in the terrain. How do you count? The enemy who has transited into another country and is fighting you from there is facilitated from there. How do you say when people, your adversary, want to make a situation for you which is two front, hostility? So how do you measure, how do you count, how do you calculate, how do you quantify this? It's a harder question. But let me tell you that we as a Pakistani nation, we as Pakistani people, have done, irrespective of all else, extremely well. We have learned so much, like on-job training. Your question that has the policy one, I think our policy has also been through hard transition. Our policy makers, like for the world it was new thing, for us also it was a new thing. We have been altering, we have been correcting, we have been recorrecting, we have been readjusting. But the fact is, not only policy, the implementers, all those who are on ground, all those who are subject of the terrorism, the people. So I will not give any credit to one area only. I think on the whole, as a society, as a nation, as people, we have done extremely well. And why should I say this? Because we were faced with a fatwa that we are fighting for kufr. We are siding with infidels. Therefore, jihad is legitimate against Pakistan. And the main ideology the heart of it, the soul of it, the life of it was Talibanization. Unless you have eradicated the cause, unless you have given a better cause, this is a long haul, long process. But the fact is, Talibanization ideology, I'm talking of Pakistan, is diminishing, is receding, is degrading. There is no more appeal in this. There are no more recruitments. There are no more people vouching for it, going for it, getting enrolled. It is drying up. The enemy is on the run. Enemy is not on our space. Non-state actors are receding gradually. So the heart of it, the soul of it is dying. That is what is my biggest reason as a practitioner, that I must say that we are doing well. If it is not concluded yet, we are winning the war against terrorism, however it has been coined. I think the youth which is sitting here, if you work backward 19 years, minus their age, most of them were school going. How our schools have felt vulnerable, insecure. How our children have seen barbed wires on the walls. How their mothers, fathers have been worried after sending them to school. Is that the situation today? Alhamdulillah, we are much better. And also let me say, this is a greater design. We were assailed up in the northwest, in Fata, at a distant location. But actually, the main attack was in Balochistan and Karachi. And if you think of the map of Pakistan, we were assailed up in the north to distract your responses, to pull you there. But the actual attack was in Balochistan and Karachi. And God forbid, just think if Balochistan and Karachi, God forbid, is not there with you, what is Pakistan? So that was the ultimate aim if we had lost this war. So today we are intact. We are there. We may be unhappy from whatever is happening around us or whatever is not happening around us, but we are there. We are a resilient nation. We can lower the coffins in the grave and we can still dance on the drumbeat. Who is better than us? I would say we are winning the war on terrorism. And we will win it, inshallah, with such a resilient nation and with everyone willing to do good for us. There is a long way. There is Afghanistan conflict that has to be concluded. There are external reasons, but I'm sure along the way we have found solutions, irrespective of our mistakes, follies, weaknesses, we will overcome them. And inshallah, we will win this war. We are already winning. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I can see that the organizer is coming. Can we have 3 questions?
I'm informed that we can take 5 questions.
Oh, well, this is paradise. Because I was kind of heartbroken that after such a rich panel, you know, a thing that is called dialogue couldn't actually dialogue. So I was a bit afraid that that would really be so unfair. But if you have time for 5 questions, I am very happy to go ahead under the condition that you please be brief in your questions. Don't give long statements which take all the time, because then we cannot dialogue again.
Where are volunteers?
So, is there a microphone that is going
There is a
on?
one boy here and there is another boy there.
Okay, I wouldn't call them boys, but I'm not boys.
Two boys, there is any girl?
No, please, the first one,
Gentleman.
the first gentleman over there.
Yes,
Please.
okay.
Yes.
Let's book कर रहे हैं।
Hello.
So a lot has been talked about regarding the history, but one thing that we didn't discuss, in fact we didn't realize, is that Pakistan never owned its hackers. I mean, world is being excelled in that field, but Pakistan is lagging behind. Iran, which owned its Ashiana group, and US, which owned Kevin Mitnick and others. But Pakistan, I mean, this is an era of hybrid warfare, but Pakistan is still lagging behind in that. I mean, there is still time that we can own our hackers. I mean, Pakistan is way behind in that field. We can own those people who can help us in terrorism and whatever that acts we might say India is doing whatever. So that's the question.
Okay, I think this was more commentary and an indirect question, which is perfectly legitimate. There is another question over on the left side.
अस्सलामुअलैकुम। जी सर जो कह रहे थे, क्वेश्चन कहानी नहीं है कि मतलब हम गए, फिर स्वात में इस तरह लोग आए थे कि मतलब शरीयत कानून को हमने नाफिज करना है, फिर हम खैबर एजेंसी गए, फिर हम वज़ीरिस्तान गए, फिर हम बलूचिस्तान गए। कि मतलब अगर एक जगह इस तरह कोई घोंसला बन जाए तो हम मान लेंगे, लेकिन अगर हर जगह इस तरह घोंसले बनते जाएंगे फिर हम आएंगे तो
Is there any lady which has a question? Because the gender balance is kind of out of control. If there is no lady which I see, we go on with the gentleman in the back there.
There is no lady asking.
Well, then take the gentleman in front of you.
Hello. I am Gurukar नहीं है जनरल सर, मैं भी स्वास्थ्य से हूँ। जो आपने कहा, ये सिर्फ आप कह रहे हैं, ठीक है? मूवीज ऑन द अदर डे, क्योंकि
आवाज नहीं आ रही।
हेलो, क्योंकि this is not in open where the war and terror. You claim that you fought, but that is not an open thing, because if anyone say anything, they disappear. But I will tell him another question. It seems that I think that it is not the time that the world should come back to another Westphalia to decide, because everybody discussed this, but this is not the people's resentment and the reaction of people. The modern terrorism. There is states behind all this drama. One state is intervening in another state, or either the state is controlling its own people through this war and terror. So this is a new form of the war, the informal war. So the world should sit and decide again that they should stop to use this terrorism policy instrument, because that is not the outcome of the ideology. Before, I think in 20th century, ideology policy used to be the tool of ideology, but now ideology is a tool of the policy. So I think we should focus on this. We are beating the wrong bush. The world should sit and decide that they shouldn't use this inhuman tool to achieve their vested interest. I will say vested interest. This is not the people's interest, because this is not the people's election as you call people alienation. Because when people got alienated, their rights violated, PDM came and they are on the roads. They demanded for the implementation of the constitution.
Thank you very much for
The Iraqi people are on the roads.
Thank you very much.
They are not following the Bukhari's.
You
So
remember-
please say they don't represent people. They represent states. and the establishments of every state.
So you remember the condition of the question was to degree.
The condition is that this is not the time to
The lady here.
do another response.
There is a lady somewhere.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Myself Intizar Hussain Abru from Jacobabad, Sindh province. A little question I have with the Lieutenant Retired General Tariq Dalwia sir, that in today's current situation and scenario, Pakistan facing economical problems, also Pakistan youth. In today's current scenario, Pakistan, sir, myself Intizar Hussain Abru from Sindh, Jacobabad district, Sindh province. My question is, in today's current scenario, where Pakistan facing very badly economical problems and jobless issues of youth, in case of any war of America and Iran, where Pakistan will stand? Number one. And supplementary is, ये जो आपने बात कही कि हम जंग जीत चुके हैं या जीतने जा रहे हैं, तो पाकिस्तानी यूथ को क्या मिला है इस जंग से? क्या खोया क्या पाया? 2 लाइनों में अगर बता देंगे तो आपकी बड़ी मेहरबानी होगी.
Okay, finally there was a lady at the end of the room.
Pakistan is opening up to tourism, particularly on the religious side, and we've seen that yesterday with the UK making a statement around the traveller sites opening. How will Pakistan continue the gains made in security to ensure that tourists are safe?
Thank you very much. I think we have done our 5 questions. My suggestion is that the panel picks whatever he or she would like to respond to and respond. So please.
Thank you. To the first gentleman who pointed out that Pakistan's hybrid warfare, I think Pakistan is going through a hybrid democracy. And so therefore, this is an aspect. Let us be truthful again. Pakistan is going through economic stagnation. We have a politicized law enforcement. We have corruption, organized crime, and authoritarian rule. The government has lost legitimacy in the eyes of their people. There is widespread perception of lack of fairness. Elites enjoy a set of privileges and prerogatives denied to most citizens. There are pent-up frustrations and the violence is the result. In one sentence, we are a socially fractured nation. There is disconnect between the state and society. Society's rising demands and expectations are outpacing the capacity of the government to respond. So this term elite is a curse that will deny social justice to have-nots, and this vicious cycle will invariably breed violence, terror, and fear in society. The establishment, they have enormous power. They are destroying or eroding the democratic institutions in the process, while we are a very resilient society, but the state has to change its policy if we have a bright or prosperous or peaceful future.
Thank you. Anybody else who would like to respond? Can you have General?
No, not really. The question was about the youth, and then part of it was what is our position on Iran and US, and what the US, what youth has gotten out of this war on terrorism. So I think to youth I will say that on the whole, Alhamdulillah, you are there, you are well protected, and good that you did not become the part of that terrorism, because you could have been. Anyone could have been. I think for the time being, we have contained, we have sustained, and then the good days will also come. Inshallah.
Yeah, very quickly, just let me comment on this. I think several questions came up. I think that broadly speaking, the real challenges of tackling alienation between the state and the society, and there are multiple levels at which that has to be dealt with. Freedom of expression, freedom of association, you know, economic security, and you know, we talk about the fifth generation war, is it? Fifth generation war? Fifth generation war. Fifth, yeah, so that war can't be fought with people within the country, right? So for that you really need to build bridges of dialogue and transparency with society. I think that's the critical challenge. And to have genuine democracy and genuine rule of law. Look at the joke called accountability that carries on in this country. I mean, it's not a political thing. I think ultimately it is political, but all these things have impact on security as well. Because ultimately, if you are saying that there are external threats, which there are in real threats, and if you have alienation within, then you can have proxies. You have to deal with issues within the country. You have to have dialogue. You can't have hybrid democracy. There's got to be genuine rule of law. And I mean, again, supporting whatever Tariq Khosa said, I think on the military front, on the kinetic front, what General Sub said, a lot of it is correct. I mean, let's be clear. If we've rolled back the structures of terrorism, etc., which of course initially 79 onwards, we ourselves put them in place. I think we used these different groups which morphed into terror groups. They were our assets. So and General Bajwa says those assets, days of assets are over. That's great. So I think that on the military front, we have the means, and we are tackling the threats that we have, terrorist threats emanating from abroad. The challenge is really within. Thank you.
Just few words. There's a lot of talk about hybrid war these days. Well, actually, there's always external factor to a problem, but the way it is being stressed, sometimes it feels that it is a means to divert the attention from the real problems that the country is facing. Like, for example, if you see actually what we have discussed at length about whatever has been happening. So the main problem lied in our policies. From the very outset, when we are talking about the rise of militancy, yes, there was a foreign factor, but basically a country which becomes a kind of vulnerable to outside interference is largely because they are weak from inside. And I think probably this should be remembered, because we keep talking about hybrid, so everything what is happening in country is a conspiracy. Well, yes, actually there may be some conspiracy around, but that's not the major use. What happened in Karachi? What happened in Balochistan? What happened in Swat? What happened in FATA, or former FATA rather? Actually, have all. If you see, the root cause lies within those areas. Thank you.
Just a few words. I would reiterate what has been said by my colleagues here. The basic point which needs to be made is that we are moving from one phase of counterterrorism to the next. And this phase has absolutely different requirements. Hybrid warfare, yes. But now this is a hybrid warfare which needs a whole of government approach to be dealt with. And if we continue to stick to a military-dominated response, that is going to be counterproductive. We have to move on to a civilian-dominated response. My basic point is that this is the time to civilianize security. The military has played its role. They have done a wonderful job. They've reclaimed FATA, they've reclaimed Sabat and Karachi. But now this is a time to change our approach and to focus more on the non-kinetic factors, ideological factors. And the state has to change its policy of supporting the non-state actors. That has to be done with. I mean, we've suffered from the hand, the panelists here have stated that yes, the non-state actors were created by us. So when we are now fighting them, we are just, who is to be blamed for that? Nobody but ourselves. But the time right now, let's look ahead and focus on this thing, that we need to change our approach, we need to involve the people, we need to involve the civil society, we need to involve all segments of the government, rather than it being a military-dominated response.
Thank you very much for this very stimulating discussion. Maybe I can end with raising 3 points which were responding to what you have said on the panel. The first thing is what the General said about fighting Sharia in Swat. That's a very interesting thing. I remember 22 years ago, passing Malakand division on my way to Peshawar, and there was a blockage on the, formerly on the GT road, and people were blocking, nobody could come. I went out and asked them, why are you blocking the road? And they said, we are demanding Sharia. That was the end of the 1990s. And I asked them, why? You have courts, you have police, why are you having Sharia? Why? And people told me there is no justice in Pakistan. It is not for the poor. It is only for the feudals or the rich. They can buy justice. And it's better to have in Iraq kind of justice like Sharia, where everybody is equal in front of God, than having a defective kind of justice like that we have. So the point here was, from my side, that I really think, like in Swat, kinetic means, which means using violence and getting people killed, was probably very necessary. But in the long run, if we don't want to repeat this kind of things, probably this kind of things should be addressed by whoever can address them. The second point that I want to raise is going what you. I think there is this habit of finger pointing. Westerners are pointing to Pakistan or to Middle Eastern countries as being, and many friends in Pakistan pointing to the West. I think both are right, but we shouldn't play them off. We should accept that both Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and America and Europe share the responsibility for the mess. And I think we can only get out if we are accepting that and cooperating and not repeating the mistakes. The final point here is the assessment, which probably everybody agrees on, that violence is receding and the militancy seems to be drying out. And I think that seems to be the case very much, and that's wonderful. But two of our speakers have also mentioned that has been going on in Iraq as well. The so-called Islamic State was defeated twice. It was defeated in I know Iraq quite well. It was defeated in 2007, 2008, and it came back because of a vacuum in the politics and mistakes of the government. And it was defeated in 2017 again, and today, trust me, it is preparing to come back. So again, I would support what your majority view was, that having made all this progress is wonderful, but we have to be very careful not to lose in the future what we have gained in the past. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for this wonderful discussion that we had. Thank you.